year after Turkey threw its support behind the Syrian rebels. Assad was likely giving Turkey a message that he was not afraid to defend himself from them, and possibly anyone else. Iran has developed ballistic missiles that they claim could strike U.S. bases throughout the Middle East, as well as in Israel, within minutes of being attacked. Iran has consistently made threats to the U.S. and Israel of retaliation if any attempt to destroy their nuclear program is made. They might also use their missiles to defend Assad from outside attack. As time goes by, we'll see how these events play out. Results from a Swiss Institute's examination of clothes worn by Yasser Arafat shortly before his death in 2004 have created calls for an autopsy on his remains. Arafat's death was somewhat mysterious because no identification of the illness he had was ever given. Arafat collapsed in October 2004. He had been confined by Israel to his headquarters at Ramallah in the West Bank since 2001, after a renewed Palestinian uprising. Arafat's aides stated that he had just had the flu, but the doctors that flocked to his bedside could not find the cause of his illness. Arafat was airlifted to a military hospital in France, where he fell into a coma and died on November 11th. French doctors also stated they could not identify Arafat's illness, and French officials refused to even state the nature of Arafat's sickness. This led to speculation that the PLO leader may have had AIDS, stomach cancer, or even have been poisoned. The popular opinion by many Palestinians is that Israel was behind Arafat's mysterious illness. Israel is not shy when it comes to eliminating threats to their nation. Many times they had opportunity to remove Arafat, but did not, because of political and practical concerns. It seems unlikely that they would bother eliminating Arafat. At this time, he was 75 years old, giving him a martyr's death and a rallying point for the Palestinians. It is more likely that they would have let him fade away. No matter how Arafat would pass away, there would be those who would point the finger at Israel in an attempt to take advantage of the situation, and if nothing else, try to make Israel look bad to the rest of the world. The propaganda war that the Palestinians have been using on Israel has gone on since the beginning of the conflict, with absurd claims ranging from there was no Jewish temple on the Temple Mount to Jesus being a Palestinian. No direct evidence has been uncovered of Israel assassinating Arafat. At the time of his death, the chaos of who would take over the leadership role of the Palestinian Authority and how they would move forward eventually eclipsed the accusations and suspicions against Israel, but they would never go away. Al Jazeera Television recently funded a documentary investigating Arafat's death. They recruited a Swiss institute to study some of Arafat's clothes supplied to them by Arafat's widow, Suha Arafat. Radiation experts claim to have found high levels of radioactive plutonium-210 on the clothes. This material had been in the news in 2006 when it had been determined that a former Russian spy named Alexander Levenko was effectively poisoned by it when he ingested some with a meal. A former Kremlin security officer was suspected in the case, but Russian authorities would not allow him to be extradited from Russia to London, England, where the murder occurred. These results have prompted the Palestinian Authority to make plans to exhume and autopsy Arafat to better determine his cause of death. The Institute's findings still create a bit of a mystery because Arafat's symptoms at the time of his illness did not conform to the known symptoms of ingesting the radioactive agent plutonium-210, which was found on his clothes. There could be a natural reason for the higher rate of radioactive particles, as well as the possibility of it being planted on his clothes at a later date. The autopsy results will go a long way in tracking down what sickness killed Yasser Arafat, but probably will give little to no help in reversing any of the suspicions against Israel. The recent results of the presidential election in Egypt have resulted in the first freely elected Islamist president, Mohamed Morsi. Morsi became Egypt's fifth head of state since the overthrow of its monarchy 60 years ago. Morsi, who has ties to the Muslim Brotherhood, said he would honor international treaties, a reference to the peace treaty Israel and Egypt signed in the 70s. But he also pledged support for the legitimate rights of the Palestinians. For a short time, the Islamists didn't quite have the power they thought they would have had because the Egyptian military and courts were diluting their newly won political power. so that they cannot impose their radical agenda on the people of Egypt. However, this did not last long, as the Islamists have made steps to consolidate their power in Egypt. Whether this leads to further repression of the Egyptian people or to civil conflict in Egypt, we don't know. And what exactly will happen in Egypt in reference to Israel is certainly anyone's guess. In the UK, a government advisor compared evangelical Christians to totalitarian Muslims. Alan Judd, an advisor to the Secretary of State for Education, made the comments in response to free school applications filed by evangelical Christians in the UK. Free schools in England are privately run schools that offer a more flexible approach to educating the children that go through them. It allows an alternative to the state-run and private schools that exist and gives the schools more freedom in the education process of their pupils. Religious groups commonly apply for these schools. Mr. Judd's statements came from an article he wrote in the Telegraph newspaper, where he stated, "To ban believers from setting up free schools would be to exclude a large number of able, well-meaning, and experienced people who can do much to raise levels, generally. The trouble is, as always, when it is taken to extremes, whether it's evangelical Christians, totalitarian Muslims, or segregationist Jews. Such applications need careful vetting, not because there shouldn't be far-out religious and ideological beliefs, but because the taxpayer shouldn't pay to propagate them, and because children should be able to participate in a wider society without having their horizons narrowed by fundamentalism." The comparison of evangelical Christians, Orthodox Jews to radical Muslims is ridiculous. But he lumps them together for one reason: fundamentalism. These groups generally do not compromise their religious beliefs. This creates problems for people who want a global society. They demand that everyone accept all other religions as equal to their own, and you better not speak out against them or the immoral behaviors of unbelievers. Even in the U.S., fundamentalism has been linked to terrorism. Instead of calling out the Islamists, who are the only major terrorist threat in the U.S., they instead, in the interest of fairness, pull other groups into the terrorist list. Recently, a Homeland Security-funded study listed people who are reverent of individual liberty as extreme right-wing terrorists. This study defined right-wing extremists as groups that believe that one's personal and or national way of life is under attack and is either already lost or the threat is imminent. Further, right-wing extremist groups believe in the need to be prepared by taking part in paramilitary preparations and training of survivalism. Groups may be fiercely nationalistic and suspicious of centralized federal authority. Right-wing extremism also involves a belief in conspiracy theories that involve grave threats to national security and or personal liberty. This broad definition of a right-wing terrorist point to a large segment of the American population as potential terrorists. Not surprisingly, the study, which was conducted by the University of Maryland, barely mentioned Islamic terrorism and even left out known terrorist acts conducted by them, such as the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, the 1994 Brooklyn Bridge Jewish student van shooting by Rashid Baz, the 1997 Empire State Building observation deck shooting by Ali Abu Kamal, the 2002 Los Angeles airport shooting by Hisham Mohammed Hadiyet, or even the 2009 Fort Hood massacre by Major Nidal Hassan. These omissions are obviously deliberate. The writers of the study don't want to point the finger at the real terrorist threat, which is Islamic fundamentalism. They don't care about the truth, just their political sensibilities. In early July of this year, a massive storm hit Ohio, West Virginia, Maryland, Washington, D.C., and Virginia. The storm produced low-level hurricane winds, which left many without power, as trees and branches knocked down power lines. Washington, D.C. and other areas lost power for over a week. Millions of people were without power in areas unaccustomed to long-term power outages. This minor power outage, in terms of length of time, can easily illustrate the nation's dependence on electricity. Virtually everything we do is tied to it, and there can be very harsh consequences if we don't have access to it. Most businesses cannot function without power. This can extend to federal and state agencies, who also need power to get anything done.